You're listening to Books and Ideas Audio, a presentation of the Vancouver Writers Fest. The Vancouver Writers Fest connects people to exceptional books, ideas, and dialogue through year-round programming that ignites a passion for words and the world around us. We carry out our work on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. This month, we are thrilled to feature George Saunders, the author of the Booker Prize-winning novel Lincoln in the Bardo, and acclaimed short story collections including 10th of December and Liberation Day. He joined us with his latest best-selling novel, Vigil, in conversation with Alix Ohlin. This event was recorded live on February 6, 2026. If you'd like to hear more events like this one, check out our upcoming programming at writersfest.bc.ca. The Vancouver Writers Fest would like to thank Penguin Random House Canada for making George's travel to Vancouver possible for this event, as well as our public sector funders, the Government of Canada, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Government of BC, the BC Arts Council, the City of Vancouver, and CMHC Granville Island.
Good evening. Hello. My name is Leslie Hurtig, and I'm the Artistic Director at the Vancouver Writers Fest. Welcome to an evening with George Saunders in conversation with Alix Ohlin. This is my 9th year curating events at the Vancouver Writers Fest, and those of you who know me know that George Saunders has been at the top of my wish list ever since I arrived on the scene. There are very few authors whose language and display of craft grab me the way that his does. I'm simply thrilled that he was able to join us here with his new novel, Vigil. We are fortunate, very fortunate, to have the award-winning author Alix Ohlin with us tonight. Alix is the author of 6 books, most recently the novel Dual Citizens and the short story collection We Want What We Want, which was published in 2021. She has been a finalist for the Giller Prize and the Atwood Gibson's Writers' Trust Fiction Prize, among others, and her work has appeared in Best American Short Stories, The Walrus, The New York Times, Lit Hub, and The New Yorker, and on Public Radio's Selected Shorts. Please welcome Alix Ohlin.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for the introduction and for the opportunity to be part of this event tonight. It's such a privilege for me to be here in conversation with George Saunders, who is, as I'm sure you're all aware, a singular and thrilling voice in contemporary literature. He is the acclaimed author of 13 books and the recipient of many awards and prizes, including the Booker Prize for his novel, Lincoln in the Bardo, and this fall, the National Book Foundation's Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters. He has shared his wisdom about reading and writing craft in his best-selling nonfiction book, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain, as well as in his Substack, which I highly recommend. And of course, he has just released his new widely praised novel, Vigil, which we'll be talking about tonight. I first read George's short stories when I was a young, unpublished writer working as a temp in a real estate office. And they gave me that feeling that, as Emily Dickinson said about the writing that she loved, the feeling that the top of my head was coming off. In his absurdist satire of capitalist systems and the dehumanizing language used by them, his work was at once shockingly recognizable and wildly, wonderfully strange. Since then, I've had the good fortune of crossing paths with George a few times over the years, and I wanted to share a little bit about one of those times when I, early in my teaching career, interviewed for a position at Syracuse University, where George has been a faculty member since 1997. For those of you who haven't experienced the joy of an academic job interview, I'll just explain that these can be marathons that take place over 2 or more days, in which you are marched across a series of institutional contexts, endlessly auditioning and being measured against criteria that remain mysterious and unknowable, but against which you will inevitably be found wanting. In other words, it is not unlike living through a short story by George Saunders. But that was not at all my experience of being at Syracuse. Over the course of the 2 days that I spent there, George made me feel seen and validated as a writer and as a teacher in a way that other academic job interviews, even those with a more successful outcome, had not. It was a real model for me of how to move through the world as a writer and as a human being, and it's something that I've strived to emulate myself in my own life ever since that time. And it's also the model that we see operating so generously in George's fiction, where all characters, even in moments of failure or frailty, are allowed their essential humanity, are treated as deserving of compassion and care. What a gift that he is here to speak about all of that and more tonight. So please join me in welcoming George Saunders. George, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Great,
it's so nice
great to have you.
Oh, thank you for doing this.
It's really a pleasure, and I know that you've been on a lot of speaking engagements already. You've been on Colbert, you've been on Ezra Klein. I know this here, though, with us in Vancouver is the pinnacle, right?
It is, actually. It's a privilege. I've never been here before. It's such a beautiful city.
Well, we're so thrilled to have you. I know that many people in the audience are, of course, huge fans, and also it's a real writer's audience tonight, too. I feel like every writer I know in Vancouver is here, so really looking forward to the conversation tonight.
I also have been looking forward to this, and this may be a little corny, but just as a chance to apologize. Seriously, no, I'm not kidding. I can assure you that many of us have been wincing for the last year at the level of insult and stupidity coming from the top. And, it really is a feeling of having a dear friend as someone is insulting them to your face. So sincerely, I apologize.
Well, we accept your apology and we do not hold you responsible. But so you're here. The occasion of your visit is the new novel, Vigil, and I'm really delighted to have the chance to talk to you about it. So for people who maybe haven't had a chance to read it yet, Vigil, the sort of occasion for the book is the deathbed vigil of an oil tycoon named KJ Boone, whose life's work has had, let's say, toxic effects and impacts on the planet. And it's the story of, his movement towards death, but even more so, it's the story of all the characters who kind of gather around his deathbed, both living and non-living, those characters. So can we just start by talking about what was the genesis of the book for you, and maybe how did it evolve as you worked your way through the writing of it?
Yeah, I tend to, the only thing I really trust is voice. So I had a long, I maybe generously call it an apprenticeship of trying to be Hemingway light, and it just didn't work for me because I was assuming somebody else's voice and trying to, graft my experiences onto that. So when I had finally the breakthrough I had was that understanding myself as someone who would entertain through voice was the way. So when I'm starting something, I might have an idea, like a conceptual idea. Like for this one, the through line was stinker dies. That was the whole thing. So I'll have that, and I think, climate change, put that in there. But then the litmus test is when I start, can I do a voice that keeps me interested? So with this one, he interested me because I used to work in the oil business when I was young, and I could kind of channel that thing. Yeah. And then this other ghost showed up, and I just loved her and could do her, could do the voice every day. When we were kids in Chicago, if you weren't particularly athletic, which I wasn't, or popular, which I wasn't, or intellectual, which I wasn't, you could get a little cred by doing imitations of people, kind of George Carlin, Richard Pryor, Rich Little. So if you could do your teacher, that was good. Your mom was always a good one. But for us, the highest level was when you would make up some guy and do the voice. I'm Ned Farquhar. And then your friends would go, oh, okay, Ned, And then the whole game was to stay in that character all day and kind of populate his universe with quirks. And then years later, I thought, oh, that's actually fiction,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that channeling of voices. Yeah. And then in this book, there is there's KJ Boone, and there's the woman that you're talking about, Jill. And then there's a host of other voices too. And that was also the structure of Lincoln and the Bardo, right? This idea of like collective voices coming together and these ghosts and spirits sort of joining together in conversation. And I wonder, like, what is it with you and ghosts, I guess?
Well, I'll answer this kind of sideways. For me, when I was a younger writer, I was always stymied by words like plot, character, structure.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I have to improve my structure. So I finally realized after years of writing and teaching that, like, structure, for example, is just putting yourself in a position to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
And that you can do in an interesting way. So I think the ghosts really are an occasion to do a bunch of different voices and kind of have fun with that. And then, of course, once you decide on a structure, it does have thematics and all that. But for me, it's really just, I don't like that mode of writing this all sweat equity, where you're doing something you don't want to do. And because I did that through my whole 20s and most of my 30s, I know it doesn't pay. So as soon as I get to something where I'm doing my duty as a writer, like describing a suit, I just won't do it. So I found that to lurch away from the stuff you don't want to do, it's exactly equal to structure.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I mean, so much of like the movement of the novel is just like what happens when you bring all of these disparate voices together in the same container, and like in the novel becomes an arena of conversation in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I love the idea that and this is Chekhov, that a work of art doesn't have to solve a problem. It just has to formulate it correctly. Right. So what that means for me is if you have 4 people in a room and they're there because you can do the voice, each of them will start to occupy a different rhetorical position. And if you crank it up and make them each as articulate as possible, then you've got a really interesting argument where instead of the author saying, I approve of character A, he's going to win, you split into the 4 different characters.
Right.
And they talk. And at least when I see it done by a master like, say, Chekhov, what you notice is that whatever you think the argument is about, it comes up. And what happens to me with Chekhov is I notice my kind of facile, everyday judging mind going, oh, Anton wants me to like this character. But Chekhov is ahead of us in compassion, so he weights all of them equally, and your judgment mind keeps moving around until it goes quiet. And then in those rare moments at the end of Chekhov, or I'd say Tolstoy or any great writer, mostly you're just aware of how judgy you are normally, and then that has this beautiful benefit of going, oh, I can wait. I can judge later. And if you judge later, you get more information. And also, often you end up in a place where for a few split seconds, you're comfortable in a non-judgmental space, which is kind of a holy spot,
A holy spot. Yeah. That's really beautiful. And, another thing that I think happens for me as a reader in these conversational or this like collage of voices coming together is that it's so pleasurable to read these different linguistic registers coming together. Like there's so much like texture and density in your work. And I mean, that's true of all your work. You often like will bring together like high and low registers, or there'll be like high flown diction from the 19th century combined with something that's like super contemporary and funny and kind of undercuts it. And that like sort of juxtaposition of language and cadence, it's just like, it's so fun to read, and it creates so many like moments of delight and surprise for the reader.
Thank you for noticing that. And also for the word fun, because that I'm 100%,
Yeah. So I guess I'm wondering, like, what is your process like as you're deciding sort of like when to switch from one voice to another, or who to put next to each other from one page?
Yeah, my method, such as it is it's kind of embarrassingly simple, which is just try to put all concepts about what good writing is or what you did yesterday and just sit down in front of the page and just start reading with a sharp Red Wing pencil, And that in that moment, there's a kind of it's an impulse frequency that I've learned to trust, which is I don't like that, or that needs something else. And I don't, if it's a little too conceptual, I don't like it. If it's too woo, I don't like it. but there's just a certain pitch of preference that I trust. So I just go through like that, and it really is trying to keep all of the ideas of the shape of the book or the intention or the themes at bay, and just react to the text on the idea that, one, the reader has to stay in the text with some degree of fascination or you don't get anything.
Yeah.
Second, that the reader is 15% smarter than me and more acute in her perception. So I can't phone anything in. I have to kind of try to imagine her a little ahead of me always and make sure that I edit with that in mind. And then the sort of implied thing is that I really respect you, dear reader. I really want to fascinate you. And I trust that these little grammatical things and syntactical things and even punctuation will be picked up by the reader. So that's kind of a leap of faith to say, we're communicating on such a subtle level that I can really trust that my micro choosing will get relayed to you. So in my perfect experience, this idiot has been revising and revising in that mode for many, many days, and a little ghost comes out who's a lot better than me. And then the reader over there, sort of flattered by that opinion of her, a little ghost comes out of her, and the two ghosts kind of get together. And it's in that kind of rarefied reading moment that we all, crave. I think.
Create meaning. Yeah. So I understand the sort of the notion of working intuitively, or also like giving yourself over. It sounds like in a way to the process of writing like sentence by sentence and word by word in a way. But this is like a book with weighty themes and concepts and ideas in it. So at what point do you sort of have the thing in front of you and move to shape it towards one idea or the next?
It's pretty early, actually, but even those big moves are sort of intuitive. Like I'll get to a section and go, oh, here's a transition. In this section, my energy just dropped. Well, let's come back tomorrow and see tomorrow. Whoops, once again. So then at that point, I yank that section out and just move it and say, you stay over there. You're being punished. And then eventually, so even the structural stuff can be intuitive, but at the same time, you are noticing that it's about something, and you start to sort of. So I have this nice kind of Zen description of my method, but in fact, it's kind of like I'm in this elevated space and I'm just intuitive, and then my mind goes, "Oh, the New Yorker's gonna love this," And so it's for me, it's very interesting to watch the fluctuations of the mind in the creative space. It's never just any one thing.
Right. The voice in your head is more than one personality or side to their personality.
So many.
Yeah. So with this book, I've heard you talk a little bit about A Christmas Carol as being a kind of book behind the book, and I wondered if you could talk about what that book means to you and how it kind of haunts this book as a ghost, if you will.
Well, being who I didn't realize it until about halfway through. It's just like our Christmas Carol. Okay, it's an homage. But then also there's two stories by Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich and Master and Man, that I was definitely in conversation with. Both of those are end of life stories in which somebody either does or doesn't have a revelation. And then there's one by Catherine Ann Porter called The Jilting of Granny Weatherall, which is sort of the anti-Tolstoy. And in some ways it seems to me a little wiser, because in Tolstoy, the dead are very good thinkers. They're and in this one, you can feel her neurosis and her fear and her panic. So those stories were in my mind. Christmas Carol, I just have always loved it. I first saw it in the Mr. Magoo version. And I was at my aunt's house, and I just was walking by the TV, and that was on. Oh, whoa, Mr. Magoo, he rocks. And then there's a scene at the grave, and that little guy is on his knees, and he's going, "Oh, spirit." And it just shook me. I didn't know what it was, and it was years before I realized it was Dickens, But so I just love that story, and I think it's. I taught it a couple of years ago at Syracuse, and it's a masterpiece of structure. And I know some people feel it's a little sentimental, maybe it is, but if you study it structurally, it's unbelievable. It opens and it closes so perfectly. So I've got it. I think really everything I have ever written comes out of that book somehow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I mean, what seems to me to be a difference in that book and yours is the kind of the emotional heart of the book in a way. Like your book is, it's about KJ Boone, and he is like at the center of the book. We're following the movement of his soul as he moves towards his death. But all of these other characters who come and enter into his story, like their morality and the things that they are wrestling with their own souls, are given sort of as much kind of credence or as much weight in the book. So it's not just like the story of one man and is his life worth living or should he, suffer or be punished. It's also like for every single one of these people, both dead and undead, like what do they make of this?
Yeah.
Of the lives
That's
that they
beautiful.
have lived?
Yeah. I'm kind of a Buddhist. I am a Buddhist, but I'm lazy. But so a friend of mine says I'm a fellow traveler, which I will accept. But in that tradition, they talk about the fact that when you're living, your mind is so powerful. But because it's in a body, you're like a wild horse tied to a fence. So your mind can go pretty wild, but you've got the body to tamp it down. And this one teaching I heard said that when you die, that rope gets cut. So the wild horse just goes. So in both this and Lincoln and the Bardo, I was really intrigued by that idea that if you could take any one of us and, with all of our good intentions and our neurosis and our self-flagellation and our self-exaltation and cut it loose, what would it be like, So I can imagine me in the afterlife self-Googling, but I mean, that was kind of the basis for both the books is, okay, so if you took any human being who wasn't perfectly well-adjusted, i.e. any human being, and then cut that rope, so that it makes a lot of verbal possibilities, but it also makes, rhetorically, it's kind of interesting because as you're suggesting, it's not clear that in this book, it's a really scary afterlife. I think scarier than Lincoln and the Bardo. I'm not sure. It's like not rules-based anymore. Wonder where that came from. But yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So Jill Blaine is like this, she's kind of the every woman of the book is her story. She's there to comfort KJ Boone in the last moments of his life and kind of usher him into the afterlife. And I find her so endearing in her ordinariness, just like her regular outfit that she has on her skirt, her black pumps, and yet she is herself, like on her own journey, yes. Right? It's such an interesting, almost transgressive, like mind-bending idea that she has already died, and yet she still has more of a journey to go on, right, in this kind of frightening afterlife.
She had she has an experience at her death that's very profound, and so early in the book, I thought, oh, that's great. And her idea is, okay, I had an experience when I was in first grade. I was a pretty good reader, and I was going to Catholic school. And so the nuns were crazy about that I was a good reader. And I was crazy about the fact that they were crazy about me because and so it was great. It was so much fun. I just loved to go to school. And after about the first week of this, I noticed that a good friend of mine who was not a good reader was really suffering under the same energy. The nuns were very unhappy with him. And they were, doing their best to speed him along, but it was not pleasant for him. So at the end of one, difficult day for him, I just saw him in the corner crying and trying not to let us see that he was crying. And something in my mind is, I just thought, okay, I'm taking so much pleasure in this victory, so-called, but in the womb, I didn't check off the box, say, make me a good reader. I just showed up and I was good at it. Likewise, he didn't say, make me a crummy reader so I can suffer, So even at that age, I thought, oh, there's something inappropriate about the victorious ego feeling that I was having. It wasn't based in reality. It was just luck. And likewise for him. So that was an idea I've had since I was little. So I gave it to Jill, and she expressed it, I thought, pretty well. And for a while, she was a unity with me. I thought, yes, you're right about that. But then she got this intention to comfort this guy who's dying. And she was really bad at her job, I noticed. And she had this idea, but she was so obsessed with the idea that she was doing him no good. So that's when it got interesting for me to see, oh, she's an unreliable narrator. And she too is caught in some kind of neurotic loop that she may or may not get out of.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And she's also kind of tested, right? So there is another presence there who is this French engineer who has a completely different attitude, right, towards what should be happening with KJ Boone's soul. And they're having this kind of argument, like, two angels on the shoulder of the dying man.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of shattering for her to have her worldview like tested by him. Although it's also quite funny.
And this dying guy, who is a real stinker, he has two terrible death duelists. They're both kind of inefficient. But I think, Jill has something that I've heard in Buddhism called idiot compassion, which is like somebody drives a spike through your head and you're like, oh, thank you for the coat rack, that. And so she's not helping. And the Frenchman is more of a wrathful presence. And he's like, if you have somebody who's really evil, you've got to break them down first. Yeah. And that might not be pretty and it might not be kind, but you have to do it. So it was interesting. These are kind of two competing ideas that I have about how to, if you want to be a kind person, okay, that's a nice intention. But practically speaking, what does that look like if the people who you're dealing with are obnoxious or evil or cruel?
Right.
What's the right
thing? Yeah, absolutely. And there is like a real specificity to the evil that KJ Boone has done. Like, it is a novel about like climate change and fossil fuels, and like it gets quite specific, right, about the nature of the things that he has committed. And I thought a lot about writing and climate while I was reading the book. I teach a class in climate writing at UBC, and with the students, we talk a lot about how hard it can be to write about climate change as a topic. It's so vast, it's so global. The chronological scale of it differs from the scale of a human life. It's so complex. But what you've done is to sort of embody it in this one person, I think. And I wondered if you could talk about this book as a climate novel.
Yeah, I as soon as I had the thought, I went, no.
Yeah. How come?
Because you think, I wrote a climate change novel. Great.
Like
yeah. I mean,
I'll solve this problem right here in 200 pages.
Exactly. Well, or you could like, I'm against it. So
climate change bad. Short book.
Very short novel.
Yeah.
But I had a revelation years ago watching Schindler's List, which it's about the Holocaust. But of course, it isn't about the Holocaust. It's set in the Holocaust, but it's really about something much more specific, which is, say, can somebody work within an evil system to do good? So I think anytime we start a book that's about something, if we do our work correctly, the book has a mind of its own, and it really doesn't like to be told what to do, and it'll say, I'm not about that. And I think with increasing specificity, the beautiful journey is to find out what it wants to be about and then just submit to it. So here I thought, well, yes, climate change is sort of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But also in researching it, I read an amazing book called The Merchants of Doubt, or The Doubt Merchants, I can't remember. But it's a history book about how the same people who did the tobacco industry denial just moved right over into climate. Literally the same people, same techniques. So that was a nice inspiration. And one of the challenges of the book was that it's really in his point of view we mostly hear him explaining himself. So that was a challenge because, I'm not a big believer in the Cruella de Vil school of evil, which is time to get up and be evil,
Yeah.
Instead, we contextualize whatever we're doing in terms of positive things, which he does. So it was a bit of a challenge because I could describe what he did through his point of view, but I wasn't allowed really to come over his head and gesture to the reader that I too disagree with him. So that was kind of,
right. Yeah, and to me, some of the most affecting parts of the book are about him in relation to his family, right? The scenes with his parents, he comes from like nothing and he's a self-made man, and his reflections, he goes sort of back into memory and sort of re-experiences his childhood. Excuse me. And then there's also a scene where his daughter comes to his bedside and she's really wrestling with him as a figure, his politics, but also like he's her dad.
Yeah.
Right? And all of that is like there in the moment where she's trying to sort of be with him. Like,
when I was reading about these climate change, the people who in the late 90s really literally purposely delayed it 20 years.
Yeah.
And they were in a certain way, kind of, I think of them as the Bush-Cheney group, because they still were working within the surface of Enlightenment values, and they were just lying behind those. Unlike now, where I think it's all bets are off. But so they did have highly functional family lives, and some of them were very open about how much they loved their parents, and So I when I started, I thought, well, we have to make him wicked in every way. But in those early drafts, he didn't. It was just my projection. So I think part of it. I mean, people talk a lot about fiction, and I do, about fiction and empathy. But I think the first stop is clarity. You have to make a person that the reader won't be revolted. I mean, won't be resistant to, or who will be real in the reader's mind. That often feels like empathy. But I think first is to say, if the reader senses my agenda to crucify this climate guy, then we're done. You'll go, okay, I can do that on my own.
Right.
So that was a challenge.
Yeah, it's the empathy that comes through intimacy, I think, through getting to be like so close and inside his mind. Even as he's hallucinating, there's a sense of familiarity that we grow, a kind of emotional connection that we develop with him, which is not the same thing as approving of him.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that fiction can do so beautifully. There's a part in, Tolstoy has a novel called Haji Murad. It's a novella that he wrote very late in life. And there's a beautiful scene where the Russian military is having a dinner party, and there's some essential plot point that we're going to get, and that's the purpose of the scene. But meanwhile, one of the main players is sitting at a dinner table with a beautiful young woman, and they've been kind of flirting a little bit. And as this big high-tone conversation has gone, he's intensely aware of how close their feet are under the table. And Tolstoy, the whole scene, he just plays that out. That, I better move foot back a little bit. And I thought that being in the body is what fiction can really do so beautifully.
Yeah, you keep talking about like how he's positioned in the bed, right? And like his hand over the coverlet, and it really makes you like you're right there with him, right? Even as his mind is roaming like wildly through this kind of dreamscape that he's in. We also know that he's there in his body, in his bed, and he is dying, right? We're attached to both of those things at the same time. Yeah.
It was fun. I mean, it was a deep process, trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's there. He's reflecting on his life and his achievements, but also, as you mentioned, like this whole thing of like climate denial and moving the conversation back or pushing things back. Like he is like a great figure who has like effectively used propaganda and like fake news, and so it was hard for me not to see certain sort of connections to him and like sort of political landscape and figures in our world right now. And like, did you think about that as you were writing, or is that again something that sort of emerges?
Well, I started the book when Biden was president, and I assumed he would be president again. And supposedly that didn't happen. So I was a little bit kind of sensitive to the differences between this kind of bad person and the current kind of bad person. But what I noticed in the end was that, America has a fixation with materialism and power. And those two things coming together are so dangerous, because a person like this guy, or like, anybody you can name from the current administration, they're so fearful, I think, and arrogant, that the only place they can be safe is out of connection with everything else. So how do you get out of connection with things? You get above them and you oppress, So in this book, one of the interesting things was to sort of say, okay, if he was going to be converted, what would that process be like, step by step? Why does somebody go into denial? And of course, you can only look at yourself.
Yes.
So I was in the oil business when I was younger. I worked in Sumatra. And it was, for me, it was very adventurous. I was 22, never been out of the country. But we were really imperialists. We'd go into these native rainforests and just look for oil and kind of mess them up, and very disrespectful of the local culture. And at the same time, it was so exhilarating to be just free and, adventure. So I kind of drew on that to say, all right, this is where his motivation at the beginning was not to be a world oppressor. Right. So we grow that out a little bit, So it's kind of it's a strange process. And the only way I could do it is by this intuitive method, because then you get done and you're not sure what you did.
Right.
But like I would stand by every sentence in the book, but as I'm traveling with it, I'm seeing that people are reading it different ways and having different experiences, which is kind of, for me, it's kind of a first, and part of it had to do with centering him in there, I think.
Yeah. People are coming to it with a lot of judgment. And I wonder if it's because also we live in an extremely judgmental time. We live in a kind of like moral fever right now because there is so much at stake, because there's so much happening politically that is so devastating and intense. And like that, of course, affects the way we read everything, including a novel.
And when I was younger, that was my dream, was to write a book that would be not so much loved, but be sparky, that would make, but it's the times are so confusing. And I think it's, in some ways, it's kind of, I don't know, sublime in the sense that who in this world now can live a single day without intense moral questions coming up, right? And maybe some number of years ago, we could coast through entire periods of our life just dealing with the surface stuff. But now the curtain's been, at least the curtain's been parted, and we see what's at stake, and it's really amazing. It's terrifying.
Yeah, it is terrifying, and it becomes hard to imagine a world in which people come together and have a conversation. Because it's impossible, right? A lot of relationships are frayed. A lot of it's just there's such a divide, right? And I know you always talk a lot about reading as a space, or literature as a space for empathetic connection, or to understand what's going on inside the minds of other people. But like right now, it just it's seeming harder and harder every day, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know if you feel this, but sometimes sit down and go, I'm going to make up a story. You're like, oh my God, it's like you're painting the baseboards as the ceiling crashes in.
Yeah.
But one thing and I think it's probably valid and maybe necessary to look for small consolations, and to, understand that resistance, it takes a lot of forms. And for me to read a bit of Tolstoy and see that my heart is responding to a demonstrated truth, whether it's physical or metaphysical, and go, okay, that means I still know truth when I see it. Yeah. And in our country, one of the things that's happening is they are serving up, they're just serving us shit.
Yeah.
Here's a lie. Here's a lie. Here's a lie. And I think they know that in time, we're going to say, okay, just leave the shit. It's okay, Yeah. But what you see in Minneapolis is that people who can just, within their own sphere, stay with the truth.
Yeah.
Stay with a peaceful, it's actually, it can work. So for me, I'm kind of saying to myself, grand solutions might not be available. And when we try a grand solution and don't get it, that's depressing. Right. But small solutions, a lot of small solutions. I heard a Tibetan Buddhist monk one time say that the most dangerous emotion is not actually anger, but despair. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a lot of my friends are thinking about that. Like, how do we get ready for the long haul? But if your mind, even like this, in this right-wing onslaught that we're in the middle of, and the media is playing along with it, it's just drifting over to the right. And everyone who's a pundit is critiquing it in the old mode, which is a form of endorsement or normalization, I think. So the real challenge is to say, no, that is cruel. Right. It's still cruel. And I'm not budging from my feeling that that's cruel. That in itself is actually kind of tricky. It's there's a wonderful book called I Will Bear Witness. Have you read this?
No.
Victor Klemperer. And he was, lived in Dresden in the 30s. And he just keeps this very kind of self-obsessed, banal diary about life. And he's a professor, and he's learning to drive, and he's kind of a hypochondriac. But into this book, every so often he'll say, "Oh, Hitler made a speech on the radio," and he'll make some comments about it. And to read that book, it's a long book. It's kind of like, somebody said it was like the Holocaust in color, as opposed to black and white. Yeah. And you can see that what happens is that the most dangerous thing is the moving of the goalpost, which in America, we've been doing that for 10 years, like this being, barraged with this. And if the goalposts move, then you lose.
Right. Yeah. So much of it is disinformation, right? It's like a completely dishonest use of language, right? To say, like, don't believe the evidence of your eyes and ears, right?
Yes.
Very Orwellian, command of saying, like, this is authoritarianism. We will tell you, right, what the story is. We will tell you what to believe. And like under circumstances like that, your work, which so interrogates language and is so attuned to any moment of insincerity, I feel like that's really important, right? To be able to read for what feels truthful and sincere.
Yeah, I hope so. Although, I covered the Trump rallies in 2016 for the New Yorker. And one of the things that was, I mean, this is kind of a silly moment, but when I feel unsure of myself, which is often, I'll often play the New Yorker card. That's, like at the laundromat. Well, I do write for the New Yorker, So I was at these rallies, and I would say, I'm writing for the New Yorker, and never once in 10 days did anybody know what that was.
Yeah.
No, I don't mean it. I don't mean it to mock them. I just mean that was not in their sphere of influence.
Yeah.
So I feel that the frustrating thing is, I can tour the United States and talk to people, and that's great. But the people that I need to persuade aren't coming to the literary readings,
right?
And they're not reading the New Yorker, and they're under this amazing propaganda force,
right.
Which in 2016 I knew Fox, but I didn't know all of the things to the right. And the people I know who are Trump supporters, that's the biggest. I mean, if you wanted to do a survey, I'm spending 8 hours a day in front of Fox or worse.
Yeah. Fox is now becoming modern. Like the Overton window has moved to like Breitbart and is even more like kind of fringy sort of media.
Sean Hannity is now a centrist, which,
Yeah, right. Exactly. What is that? Yeah. But so that piece that you wrote in 2016, it really comes from a place of like trying to observe and understand and sort of engage with these people at the Trump rally. But that was in the first administration, which we were talking about this backstage, that like the first Trump administration was like chaotic, but like less effective. And then there was all this time to plan, and now they've sort of come out of the gate with like extraordinary effectiveness.
Yeah.
And I wonder, what do you think it would be like to try to engage with those voters or those people now versus 2016?
Well, I mean, I think the voters, the Trump voters that I know have gotten very quiet over the last few months, because and some of them are in my family, and they're very lovely people. So I think I think what's happened is that an administration that won 6.5 to 5.5 is acting like they won 10 to nothing. Yeah. And somehow administratively, they can do it. So I think for me, the key is that Trump himself is an incoherent person.
Yeah.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was raised in incredible privilege. He's been rich and famous every moment of his life. So he has no clue about what's happening. Yeah. And then a lot of people came in under him, and they also are very strange people. I mean, if you look at the top level of administration, if they moved into your neighborhood, hi, Stephen. So that, I think it's actually, although they were elected, it's a coup. Because in all the things that are so appalling to us, the numbers now are about 65. Greenland, we should even say that, but it's something like 89%, 90% of Americans are laughing at that, not laughing, but, against it. So it's sort of something going on that I don't understand, but it's a coup from the top.
Yeah.
And it won't last forever, but basically they're looting the mansion, Yeah. So I'm trying to think two things. One is it possible to clean the mess up after they finish looting? I don't know. I'm also thinking, as a writer, this had to be, cause and effect is real. So this had to be happening my whole life. We had to be moving towards this my whole life. All right, so can I think about that a little bit? What set the stage for this,
Yeah. And so much of your work, and I see this in Vigil and Lincoln and the Bardo and others of your work, it really is about trying to consider sort of like the American collective memory in a way, and think about like who are all the voices that make up American society, American history, like moving back into the past, as in this book, and trying to sort of understand, it seems to me, like who are we, we being the United States, and I don't know, out of all of these disparate voices and experiences, like what is a kind of collective identity? And maybe that's a place to think about where to sort of move towards a more positive future.
Yeah. Well, I think, the basic idea is pretty good, and we've never been that great at executing it. And so the shock of my lifetime is I thought we were getting pretty close, and then suddenly the clown show comes to town, and, so it's amazing. But, I heard a beautiful teaching by this teacher, Francesca Freematula, Buddhist teaching. And somebody asked her a version of, what does compassion look like in the face of this cruelty? And she said, well, first of all, she said, if you think about being Trump or being Stephen Miller, if you're a Buddhist, the karmic consequences of what they're doing are enormous. If you're a Christian, the sin is enormous. Whatever you, even if you're a humanist, you can say, oh my God, they're making a mess of things. And she said something that kind of startled me. She said, I feel so sorry for them. She said, I wouldn't wish their fate on my worst enemy. So that, I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting that you can, if you think about compassion, there's two, you want to protect the victims. And if you have the bandwidth, you could even say, it's not so great for the oppressors either. So I don't know, it's a strange moment.
Yeah, it sure is. That's really taking the long view, like really finding that forgiveness. Yeah, it's a tough one now.
But I mean, the greatest favor you could do them is stop them.
Just to stop. Yeah. It's interesting, like relating this back to what you were talking about earlier in terms of how you approach like revision or sort of moving intuitively towards like refining the ideas of the book. I don't know if you know Laura Vandenberg. She's a writer, short story writer and novelist, and she talks a lot about revision as a form of hope and resilience, because what you're doing when you're revising your work is to say, I do not accept the status quo. I can see that there is a different version of things, right? And that is a fundamentally almost revolutionary and certainly deeply hopeful way of thinking about what it means to make art and also like what it means to make the future. So in a way, I think like it is a political stance, but it's also a craft one as well. Right?
Yeah. I think that, I mean, the what I've been thrilled about is that in this mode of intuitively rising, it's a little bit like baby meditation for me, because the monkey mind goes pretty quiet just because you're concentrating on the phrase, do I like this or not? And then in that moment, and then with much iteration, the thing starts getting smarter than me, and it gets funnier and it gets more capacious and whatever. And I have loved the idea that there's access to something that isn't this guy. The limitation of this particular person can fall away a little bit for a few minutes a day. And that's been really, to reside with something for a couple of years and have it be more complicated than you could have imagined is such a blessing.
And there's so much surprise in it, right? Like the not knowing. Right. You could not have known necessarily the things that would emerge from your own brain. It almost feels like it's a separate process from you in a way.
The unexpected juxtaposition. And there was a student of mine said one time that Einstein said this. He said, no worthy problem is ever solved in the plane of its original conception. And it turns out I don't think Einstein actually said that, but my student said it. But I love that idea that, if you start a story and you know what it's going to be, then you're just in your quotidian self. And if you're lucky, you'll do that thing. And, but on a good day or a good book, you suddenly, the book will actually kind of lock up its arms and say, no, please don't tell me what to do. And then you have to kind of wait. And it also gives you signals line by line, like if you get to a certain place and you're like, why aren't you responding? You're not listening to me. Well, what do you want to say? I'm boring. Oh, you are boring. And for me, the big thing is that moment where you can go, all right, maybe I can actually have a conversation with my own book and listen to it and not have to get defensive about it and say, so what do you mean by boring?
It sounds like you're in couples therapy with your book.
But it'll tell you, So this idea that if you say to the book, you're what's wrong? I'm boring. Can you use a different word? I don't know. Look at page 8, idiot. And then you go, oh wait, you're not boring. You're just a little repetitive here. And then suddenly from this kind of hurtful, vague idea, you're into a realm of specificity, which is actually workable. So if it's repetitive, well, we can fix that, Right. So that's been another blessing of teaching, is to say, well, you never want to use the accusing word, but substitute in a diagnostic word. And then suddenly the student can hear you and can do something with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot about boredom, actually, when writing, like boredom as a necessary tool of self-diagnosis. Like, first of all, that boredom in some ways is a condition for creativity, right? Like forcing your brain to kind of go through boredom to get to the other side of creativity. But also when a piece of writing is boring, often there's something there that's like a nucleus of fear, You know what I mean? Like something that you're scared to go into because it would be harder or angrier or weirder than maybe you initially feel comfortable entertaining as the writer.
So when you're writing, how many times do you go through and say, it's not boring? It's not boring. In other words, how long do you resist the initial?
A lot, I think.
Yeah.
And I too have to like sort of push through it or sort of be patient with it, right? A lot of it is patience. And a lot of it is asking, well, why is it boring? Is it like, what have I internalized that I'm telling myself I'm not allowed to do? Like a lot of it, I think, has to do with like giving yourself permission to go deeper or stranger or more specific or more interesting. And with my students, I think I have encountered a certain amount of worry around like point of view and likability as well. Like perhaps a fear that a character's values might be mistaken for your own. That's something that can be really inhibiting, right?
Sure.
So, and like you're pretty fearless about like going into a lot of different characters and like embodying them or even having moments that are like pretty transgressive or like scatological or funny or strange in your work. And of course, they're like, that's wildly entertaining, but it's also where you find that position of emotional truth.
Yeah, and usually if I do something like that, there'll be a place somewhere else in the book where I can just wink at the reader and go, I know it's a poop joke. You know, and then that actually can be another form of connection. You know, I've come to think that wit in a piece of writing is just knowing where the reader is. Yeah. You can do anything you want as long as you're just checking her. And so even if you get off track, if the character says we're off track, suddenly you're back together. You know. Yeah. But something you said earlier made me think. In the last 10 years, I've been noticing. You know, when I was a young teacher, when I was a student at Syracuse, workshop was kind of like goiter identification. You know, like where's my story gone wrong? Right. You know. Kind of hurtful sometimes and also not so easy to work with. Yeah. But I started noticing in my students' work that if there's an issue, if something, you know, slows down, gets boring, or if there's a sudden intrusion of a spaceship where you didn't expect one or some strange thing, those, I started to call those avoidance moments, which I think relates to what you said earlier. The subconscious is not ready to do the work. Yeah. And what a smart thing for the writer then to make a mess so that she doesn't have to do it just there. Mm-hmm. Yep. You know, because it's maybe it's a draft 40 problem, but she's only on draft 3. And if there was a student of mine, a brilliant writer, and she had a story in which there was a really torrid attraction going on between a woman and a man. And the woman had a developmentally disabled brother who took up a lot of her time, and the man was married. So this was the obstruction. So one day the man is driving past the house and he sees the woman sitting on her front porch. He pulls over. It's a hot night. He goes up on the porch and they're talking and they're sitting next to each other and the heat is rising. And you can see that they might possibly have sex right there and the brother is sleeping on the other side of the screen door. And then it's a critical moment that the story said, suddenly the teapot went off. You know? And so at first we started, we identified that and we thought, oh, that's so smart because the second half of the story wasn't written and the writer didn't really know what that would signify. Yeah. So she just put a to be determined sign. Right. So that's a nice way to edit,
Yeah. I think that's like one of the things that's super useful about workshopping is like people who can help you identify those moments when you're getting close and then backing away and who can also find those patterns in your work. Yeah.
And don't you find too that when I was younger, I thought you found it and then you fixed it. But now I feel
one-time thing. No.
The group is just to find it. And this 9 times out of 10, the writer already knows and will have a solution.
Yeah. One of the things that you've done in your recent career that's been so interesting, I think, has been to kind of democratize your teaching self, like in the form of the book about the Russians and now also in the Story Club Substack that you have. And I feel like you're trying to kind of open the gates, like beyond creative writing programs. Say, this is what it's like to be in a class with me, or this is kind of the conversation. Can you talk about the impulse behind that?
Yeah, I mean, my journey to writing was really slow and strange. And I had a couple of teachers who really helped me. And one teacher got me into college. I was in a band as a junior in high school. And the whole thing was the other guy in the band knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy in the Eagles. That was the career plan, And so I had this beautiful teacher named Joel Lindblom who passed away this year. And he just saw something in me. I wasn't a good student at all. And he literally called the School of Mines on my behalf. And this being the 70s, he said, this guy's really a screw up, but he's got some potential. And I said, okay, have him go to summer school and we'll think about letting him in. So one teacher changed my life like that. Wow. And then when I got to Syracuse, Tobias Wolff and Douglas Unger were such generous mentors. And I never met another writer, and they just instantly welcomed me in, so I have a real fondness for teachers and for teaching, having been the beneficiary of it. And so I went on tour for Lincoln and the Bardo, and for 20 years, I'd been teaching this Russian class. And with all Syracuse, we get 700 applications, and we let 6 people come. Huh. So you could just walk in and say Tolstoy, and they would have a 3-hour session that would blow your mind, Yeah. So, but I was on tour, hadn't been teaching, and taught my first class after coming back. And I just had this incredibly kind of romantic moment of sitting in the classroom. We'd really gotten into some good stuff, little chalk dust in the air. Like, God, I love this so much. And the thought that maybe, in fact, when all is said and done, the writing might not last, but those hundreds of inflections of young minds might. Yeah. And then I thought, it turned out that I wasn't going to teach that Russian class anymore after that year. So I thought, wow, if I quit, then all of the sort of wisdom that we've brought into being is just gone. Yeah. So I wrote that book, and it was so much fun. And then it just led into the Story Club thing.
Yeah, and the Story Club is really lovely because it is you kind of reading stories and talking about writing, but it's also become like a real sort of community for people in the comments and a real kind of occasion for dialogue and conversation. It's really lovely. Did you expect that to happen?
No, I was going to be 1 year out, yeah. And then, but people are so articulate and also so civil. And so I'll sometimes go in there and just lurk in the comments, just, oh, she said that so well. That could have been an argument, but he averted it, Yeah. So I'm very proud of that community. And, also, it's great because, you can't phone that in. I wouldn't dare. Right. So when I'm going to read a new story, I have to dive into it the same way I did when I was 20. And really, when you're writing about something, you have to know it better than even when you're teaching it. So I'm really grateful for, it's been sweet, especially now, where you think so much of the dialogue in the States is just so on the surface and so aggressive. Yeah. And it was astonishing. There's 300,000 people on there, and you can talk about anything, and people are so courteous and respectful. So it can be done. Yeah. We can still do it. And so that was nice.
And it comes through this like attentiveness to these texts, right? The stories are really what brought people together originally.
I met a couple that they're mediators, so they do corporate disagreements, and so I think even some marital things, and they use Chekhov. So there's 2 people that can't stand the sight of each other. They're fighting, or 2 groups, puts gooseberries in front of them, or lady with pet dog. We're not going to talk about your issues. We're just going to do this first. Yeah. And they said it was so amazing because, first of all, people don't really want to talk about the issue anyway, so they talk about Chekhov. But in the process, the word that they used was the people are so vulnerable. Yeah. Because they'll see someone in the story that they identify with from their childhood, and surprisingly, they'll cough it up. They'll offer it to their enemies. And the enemies will sense something in that. Oh, wow, she just told me about her grandmother. And suddenly they're talking about the story. And by the time they get around to the issue, they're in a different realm. In some ways, it's just distracting the attention. But I think this Chekhovian idea of thinking the best of your reader is very powerful to be in the path of.
Yeah. And, you sort of become identified with this sort of the language of kindness, right? There's this speech that you gave at Syracuse that went viral, became a book about the importance of kindness. And
I'm over it. Yeah. I've got another speech coming out that you're not going to believe.
But I feel like, you are an extraordinarily kind person, but sometimes I feel like the way that it's talked about in some profiles or pieces on you is a little bit reductive in the sense that kindness is not the same thing as niceness, or it's not like everybody just be nice to each other. Right. It has to do with like a willingness to pay sustained attention
I think you're
to
just
people,
right.
even when things are difficult or uncomfortable or ugly.
Yeah. I made that speech. I'd given that exact speech to my daughter's 6th grade class, and it was a big hit, So Syracuse asked if I'd give a talk. I said, sure. And I was going to give that one. And the day before, I couldn't find it. So I had to kind of draft it up and give the talk. And then it became a thing. So then you become the kindness guy, which is, it's a curse. You can't, you're going to rob a bank. You can't rob the bank.
Yeah.
But it did give me an occasion to think. And I think actually kindness really, if you regard it seriously, and the Eastern traditions have regarded it very seriously, it's kind of a gateway virtue. So you say, okay, my intention is to be kind. What is it? Well, it's probably trying to be of some benefit to whoever shows up in your orb. Okay, that's good. So, but then you go into a coffee shop and the barista has been crying. Okay, here I go. Kindness. But immediately you're stumped because it might just be that just shutting up and getting out of there might be the kindest thing. Or it could be that if you said just the right thing, you could really help. How would you know? Yeah. Attention. You have to pay attention. How do you pay attention? You got to quiet your mind down. Get rid of your Messiah complex if you're me, So I noticed that it is, I think in a default, being kind is good. But in America, there's a lot of, when I did radio interviews for that book, and this lady called up and she said, I really believe in kindness. I always have. But most people don't.
The anti-kindness faction.
Or another guy said, I think Americans are just naturally kind people, but those Europeans, so it's a little bit like Jesus. You can hide behind it. Whatever you believe, you can say,
Yeah. That's great.
Jesus shares my bias.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something about also like how to pay attention. Like some of us, I think, struggle to find like the ability to focus or like kind of train our brains to pay attention. And I do think that there's something that you're getting at with like also the short story as like a vehicle for attention. That's part of the story club. And I mean, I always like to evangelize for the short story because I love to read and write them. But you also are, I think, an evangelist for the short story and the form. And it does it's like a perfect vehicle for paying attention.
It really is, because it doesn't exactly work the way real stories work.
Yeah.
There's always, the way I understand them is there's a surface thing, which is, will A marry B or whatever. And meanwhile, and the writer's concentrating on that, and we think that's the point. But meanwhile, this weird under thing is happening, and that's what the story is really about. And I think in the masterpieces, the writer didn't know that until she did. Right. And I mean, I guess that's the epiphany. But something about that means that the story, the reader has sort of two eyeballs. One is on the surface action, and one is on this rising, beautiful thing that's coming up. And I think that makes you have to read in a very alert state. And to write one, I mean, we know it's the hardest. It's just impossible because you can't fake that. You can't, and you have to authentically earn that surprise, which means you cannot master the story. Yeah, you have to really let it talk to you, and that's weird. It's just hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think about structure and process differently of the story versus the novel?
The novel, I don't. I think basically the same. The only difference with both the novels, the two novels, I just had a real simple through line, almost like a clothesline to hang the fun on. So with Lincoln, it was Lincoln goes into the crypt, interacts with his son's body, and leaves. Meanwhile, Willie's spirit shouldn't be there, and he's either going to stay or go. I didn't know. So once I had that set up and said it happens in 5 hours, I felt like, okay, I can do this. But with the story, ideally, there's none of that. It's just, I have that story, Sea Oak, that we talked about a little bit backstage. That was just, I was up in Syracuse, and there was a mall there called the Carousel Mall. You ever go there when you're at the Carousel Mall? They have a carousel. Yeah. Carousel. And the carousel goes right by Hooters. It's, every so I was looking at that, and I thought, that's weird. I kind of thought, what would the world, what would be Hooters if the world was run by women?
Right.
And I thought joysticks. That's your joystick.
Yeah.
But on that same trip, I was walking. There was these two young Syracuse kind of working class women, and they were talking in this really staccato, swear word laced. And then the other girl said, "Yeah, I know." They're just, and so I kind of found myself kind of stalking them, like, wow, this is poetry.
Yeah.
And so that just started with them talking like that.
Yeah.
And it was like that just for quite a long time to make that as funny as possible. And at one point, one of them blurted out a name, Aunt Bernie. So that's plot,
Right.
So in the best stories in the stories I like to work on the most, there's no idea what's happening.
Right.
Just squeezing a section like a seed crystal, and then something will plop out of it to indicate what the next beat should be. You go there, repeat.
Right.
And before you know it, you're telling a story that you never imagined you would tell.
Yeah.
Do your stories work like that? Are you?
Yeah, I think there is like such an opportunity for surprise, reversal. Like you kind of only need like two weird things that don't belong together, and then you put them on a collision course in a story, and you can see what comes out of that in a way, and then you can exit after 20 pages before having to deal with like all of the narrative architecture that you would have to handle in a novel. And
but it sounds like
what a relief.
That's how you get the not knowing part of it.
The not knowing part is
elements.
putting those two things together. Catherine Ann Porter, she said that too. She said, I need two things, like a memory, like a childhood memory, and then like an unexpected object that doesn't belong there. And then by dint of the fact that these things don't belong together, that's how you create it. So for you, it's like the carousel and the Hooters.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah. But they don't belong together because your mind normally wouldn't put them together.
Yeah.
And so you don't know what the relation. That's interesting. She's a great writer. Isn't she?
I love her. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have one more question, but I just want to let people know that we're going to be moving to the audience Q&A in a moment. And so if you haven't had a chance yet to put in your question or to vote a question, you can do that while I ask you. If you remember when you came to Lafayette College, where I taught a while ago, you did an exercise with me and my students that was really wonderful. And what we were just saying made me think about it, where you had these students, we all had like 2 pages or something of a story that we had brought to the session with you. And then you made us cut it in half.
Yeah.
And then you made us cut it in half again, and then again, and then again. It was so painful, but we were left with ultimately like one sentence out of what remained from
You could drive so many people out of the business in that way. And you clear the playing field.
It was so interesting. Like the lesson wasn't like, shorter is better, or like everything else in your story sucked and you found the one good sentence. It wasn't about that. It was about like making the choices to like of distillation, and also making sure that you knew that your story was malleable and like could be moved,
exactly. That's exactly it.
moved around.
Yeah.
For the short story, I do think as a form, like it does require that willingness to think about compression, and you don't have a lot of room to maneuver. So whatever is in there, like it really needs to.
I love the idea that, with my students, I say that every young writer wants to be beloved and have people read their work, and you want to be identifiable in your voice. So the only way you can do that is by maximizing the number of choices you make, and also by believing that every choice will be felt by the reader. So that exercise is a good way to say, okay, you have a page that you stand behind. I'm probably wrong, but what if you cut half? So then you do it, and then you say, now, can you tell me why? Like, what was the criterion for the cuts? Because that's going to be part of the key to your aesthetic. Then you do it again and again. And at some point you go, I say sometimes, if you can imagine looking in a mirror at yourself, and then you press a button and AI adds 300 pounds, 400 pounds. There you are. Oh. And then you start working back down through your weight. And then you get to, you're somewhere in there, there's the weight that you sort of think you look the best. Then you go light. Oh, 40 pounds, too light. So in prose style, the same, I think. Yeah. I never wrote, I still don't write at the optimal prose style. It's about 20%, too much. So to take a student and walk them through that, at some point it gets to the breaking point where they don't like it. Yeah. But it's maybe the first time they've done that, they go, oh, okay, so I can choose much more than I think I can. And the most important part is you get in touch with that super opinionated part of yourself that really does prefer the semicolon, goddamn,
Right.
And that, I think, is the part that, as a stylist, you get in the habit of giving into that, and suddenly every phrase is inundated with you-ness.
Right. Yeah. I love that idea of you-ness, right? It doesn't have to be the best story ever written. It has to be the best story that you could have written, right? Yeah. And that's where you find the best work.
Yeah, because I remember being, writing so many imitations of other writers and always feeling kind of sick about it. Like I really, and I wrote one story that was genuinely weird, and it was so, sort of disappointing in a way. Like it sounded like me, but it was so out of step with the stories that I loved. And I always say it's like, I was spending my life trying to get up on Hemingway Mountain, climbing up to see Ernest. And you get up there and then you say, well, I can only come up to his chest because I'm Hemingway light. Darn it. And then you look across the valley and there's a little shit hill that says Saunders Mountain. Oh no. And then you go down, and mountain is misspelled, but you go down there and you stand on it, and at least it's yours, So it's a bittersweet feeling. I'm not great. I'm not a master, but at least I'm not so imitative. And in that space, that holy thing happens where the things that you actually learned in your life that maybe you're not proud of, or maybe they're secret, there's a space for those things. Whereas when you were doing Hemingway, you couldn't get to your essential stuff. And so it's very kind of a beautiful moment. And when I see one of my students get there, it's so lovely, right?
Oh, it's incredible. There's nothing better.
Yeah. And they should be able to say, no, that's it. I had a student who was from a very, very poor background. He was gay, and he grew up in the Midwest in really harsh conditions. And he was a really amazing writer and could write anything. But one day he wrote a scene where he just described the bathroom of this house. And the detail was that the sink was broken. So to wash your hands, you had to take one of those rubber hoses from the shower and pull it, and it wasn't quite long enough. It just came alive on the page.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful. And everybody in their class noticed it. Mm-hmm. And so the work of that day was in the conference to just talk about the story, and then at the end, make sure that he knew how good that was.
Right.
And he knew what I was praising, and it was communicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, that's lovely.
Yeah.
A wonderful part of teaching. Well, what a wonderful conversation it's been,
you.
George.
Thank you
Thank you so
Thank you.
much for talking.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
You have been listening to Books and Ideas Audio, a presentation of the Vancouver Writers Fest. To hear more events like this one and view our upcoming events, visit our website at writersfest.bc.ca.